People carried on business in Delaware from the time of the first settlement. As settlements grew into towns and more people came, more things were needed and more businesses were born. They were small businesses. And then Delaware started growing. Violence came. The Revolutionary War was fought. And with all the changes that came afterward, business was no longer just business. It was industry. The clack of the factory. The chug of the railroad. The splash of the water wheel. Delaware, for all its smallness, had something which made it valuable for industrial purposes. It had water, and water meant power. The flour millers discovered the usefulness of Delaware's waters early in the 1700s. The mills began to rise up along Brandywine Creek, and Delaware was a good location for flour mills. There was wheat and corn grown in abundance throughout the three counties. There were good seaports for export and import. The flour milling industry began its real life around 1735, when the Quakers in Wilmington decided to take it up. They saw that Delaware was a natural spot to become a milling center in America. As the century progressed, the mills grew more numerous, and grains were ground into flour in ever-increasing volume. By 1800, Wilmington had become the flour capital of the United States. Delaware exported flour and grain products to the rest of the states and to many parts of the world. The first large industry of the first state was a success. But with the success, there was a definite problem. Getting the wheat from farm to mill, getting the flour from mill to market, neither was easy. The Delaware roads were terrible. Transportation created very real difficulties, both for people and for farm products. While Delaware businessmen struggled with successful industry and unsuccessful transportation, the leaders of Delaware State tried to make their government better. In 1792, a new constitution was drawn up for Delaware. The legislature was divided into two bodies, the Senate and the House of Representatives. The title of the chief executive was changed from president to governor, and he was given supreme powers over the state. Delaware was keeping up with the rest of the states, except possibly in that touchy matter of transportation. Delaware, with Pennsylvania, was a crossroads state. Travelers moving north and south wore a path up and down the state. The roads were in constant use. Something had to be done. But with the highways in bad shape, Delawareans looked, as they always had, to the water. More and more ships were sailing to and from Delaware, and most of the early transportational improvements dealt with boats. Delawareans John Fitch and Oliver Evans were experimenting with steam power. And in 1787, John Fitch was granted
the sole and exclusive right and advantage of making, conducting, and employing the steamboat, by him lately invented.
Oliver Evans was meanwhile dreaming ahead to the time of steam railroads, but people were not yet enthusiastic about the idea of trains. Everyone, however, loved the steamboat. The increased interest in water travel caused new growth in a Delaware industry which had been around since the very beginning: shipbuilding. The shipbuilding industry had become more important in the Revolutionary War years, and it continued to hold a high place in Delaware industry for centuries to come. Delaware travelers seemed to feel most at home on boats. Since both the Delaware River and the Chesapeake Bay were heavily traveled, a way was needed to get from one to the other in a hurry. The solution to this began in 1803, when the Chesapeake and Delaware Canal Company began its planning. And in 1829, the Chesapeake and Delaware Canal was opened, linking bay and river and providing a shorter water route from Philadelphia to Baltimore. For the same purpose of linking waterways, the Delaware roads gradually improved. And in 1832, another improvement in land travel. The railroads came to Delaware, and though they never did really spread in a large network over the state, the railroads, with the better highways and the canal, made transportation and shipping a great deal more convenient. Delaware transportation had to progress to keep up with Delaware industry. Industries were growing in great leaps. Most of them were concentrated in northern Delaware, and the region's fame was growing.
The district around Wilmington is probably the greatest manufacturing center in the United States.
In little more than a century and a half, Wilmington grew from a town of 4,000 to a city of 30,000. Water, agriculture, and ports had brought industry. Industry brought people. Flour milling led the industrial field, but it was not the only growing business. Between 1750 and 1860, there were many industrial happenings in Delaware. Iron ore was mined in Newcastle County. Forges and furnaces were built to process the ore. The paper industry appeared and grew. In 1816, Thomas Gilpin and Company presented the first American paper machine to produce an endless sheet of paper. The Quakers began making leather products, an industry which was to make Wilmington a leather center in the United States. The textile mills flourished in northern Delaware. In 1831, Joseph Bancroft and Sons of Rockford, Delaware, controlled one of the largest cotton dyeing and finishing plants in the world. In 1844, the Delaware shipbuilders Harlan and Hollingsworth launched the Bangor, the first seagoing iron propeller steamer in the country. By the mid-1800s, Delaware's industries had impressed the nation. One of the most swiftly growing industries had come to the state in 1803, when Eleuthère Irénée DuPont, newly arrived from France, picked Delaware as the perfect spot to put up a factory. Powder was desperately needed in those pioneering days, and what was available was not dependable. Irénée DuPont had experience with gunpowder, and he saw at once that American powder was of a very poor quality. DuPont had worked at the National Powder Works in his native France. When he and his family had fled to America as a result of the French Revolution, he had to make a new life for himself. Irénée DuPont had important contacts in America, men like Thomas Jefferson, who urged him to manufacture gunpowder. DuPont had his career waiting for him. He thought it over. He decided to open a powder mill, and he found his location, the Brandywine near Wilmington, Delaware. All the water power necessary to drive his mill, a good location for shipping his product. DuPont was setting out to fill an American need, and he put his business in a good place. He built his plant and gathered his workers. He designed and constructed not one large factory, as was the custom, but several scattered buildings, a small powder complex for safety's sake. His original drawing of the plant looked strange to the other manufacturers. Some people thought he was crazy. He was not. He knew that his plan would prevent the spreading of possible fires and explosions and ensure the safety of his workers. In 1804, the first DuPont factory in America, Eleutherian Mills, was in operation. Some of the original buildings remain today. Soon, the first shipment of powder was ready. It was a turning point both for the man and for the state of Delaware. America liked René DuPont's gunpowder. The American government gave its business to DuPont. DuPont was very nearly an instant success, and as the 1800s rolled on, he was more of a success. The War of 1812 stimulated the need for gunpowder. DuPont built another mill. Now he had two, but he did not stop with two. Eleutherian Mills, 1802. Upper Hagley Mills, 1812. Lower Hagley Mills, 1828. Brandywine Mills, 1836. Powder for weapons. Powder for quarry blasting. Powder for coal mining. Still more mills were built. Quickly, steadily, the DuPont industry was growing into an empire. René DuPont had founded the empire, but the business did not fall away with his death. Other members of the family continued to head the firm. Alfred DuPont, Henry DuPont. And the business was to grow and expand through generations of other DuPonts. One of the most fantastically successful industries in America had set its roots in the earth and streams of Delaware. The state had already made its name in industry. But the DuPont factories put Delaware on the industrial map in a way that can never be erased. The first state vibrated with industry, and through the years, Delawareans became accustomed to the clack of the factories, the chug of the railroads, and the splash of the water wheels.